Okay, here we are on the last little piece of the immunity lecture. We're going to go into the T cells, which are part of the adaptive immune system. So T cells are just a type of lymphocytes. And remember, they are called T cells because they are made in the bone marrow, but then they travel to the thymus where they become T cells. And then from there, they go around and just sort of patrol all of those secondary lymphoid organs, things like lymph nodes and tonsils and things. And so T cells are different from B cells. B cells do what's called humoral immunity, whereas T cells do what's called cell-mediated immunity. And what that means is they actually attack your own cells. So your T cells attack your own cells. So why would they do that? Why would a T cell attack its own cell? Okay, and it usually is because that T cell is infected. The way that viruses work is they get inside of your cells, they go to the nucleus, they hijack the machinery that's used for protein synthesis, and it uses your machinery to make its own proteins that then assemble into another viral vector, and then they'll pop open and do it all over again. Okay, so it's better to go ahead and, sort of contain that virus within that one cell and kill that cell off, than allow it to, infect other cells. Okay, so it's sort of like, committing cell suicide to save the rest of the cells. And then the other reason that your T cells might want to attack your own cells is if that cell becomes cancerous, where you've lost your cell checkpoints, so that when you're doing, the cell cycle, it's not regulated and you're doing unregulated cell growth. We don't want that to become a tumor or become cancerous and metastasize, so it's better to go ahead and just kill it off if it's unable to repair the damage. Okay. So when T cells are activated, and I'm going to talk about how they're activated after all of this. When the T cells are activated, they'll be exposed to an antigen. And once they're exposed to the antigen, they do a similar thing when we already saw that clonal selection for the B cells. They are going to create more cells, and as they create more T cells, they're going to further differentiate into one of 3 different types of T cells. We have killer T cells, also known as cytotoxic T cells. Those are the ones that are going to do the cell-mediated killing of the cells. So those that will kill your own body cells. Then we have the helper T cells, and the helper T cells, their job is to go in and activate other T cells and also activate the B cells. The B cells can then create antibodies, which can activate the innate immune system. So the helper immune cells make the response bigger by activating more immune cells. And then the third one is a regulatory, also known as suppressor T cells, and their job is to stop the immune response. So we have one, the helper T cells that make it bigger, and then we also have a second one with regulatory or suppressor T cells that make the immune system smaller, make it, sort of stop the being like, whoa, hang on here. So why would you need a type of T cell, a type of immune cell whose job it is to stop the immune response? And it has to do with, well, think about what happens to your body when you go too big, right? You can get systemic responses. For example, if you're really allergic to some particular something, like, I don't know, cat dander or something, you can go into systemic shock where you have inflammation and your body starts shutting down and your organs start shutting down, and you start damaging your tissues. So you want to prevent that. So you want to prevent this systemic too big of a response. And the regulatory or the suppressor T cells help reduce the amount of autoimmunity, which means that your body is attacking its own tissues. And so that helps limit and prevent that autoimmunity as well. Okay, so you need one thing to be like, hey now, let's not get crazy. Let's keep this in perspective. Okay, so let's talk about those killer T cells, the cytotoxic T cells. Those are the ones that do cell-mediated destruction, which just means that they kill your host cells. And so what happens is when the cell is infected with a virus or sometimes a fungal infection, what it does is it sends up these little kind of SOS signals onto the surface and send up the SOS signals, which are in green here with a little antigen piece inside of it. That'll then activate the cytotoxic T cells to cause apoptosis. And what apoptosis does is you insert those complement proteins that I was just talking about before into the cell membrane. When you insert the little complement proteins, that just makes a big hole in the cell membrane, and that's going to cause the liquid to come in, which would cause it, which would lyse the cell and kill off the cell. Okay, so you're going to be killing off your own cells if they're infected or if they're cancerous. I do want to talk just a tiny little bit about AIDS and HIV. HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus, and so this is the actual virus. And what this is a virus that attacks those helper T cells, specifically the CD4 cells, which are the type of helper T cells. And remember that the function of the helper T cells is to activate other types of cells. So activate other T cells, activate B cells, activate the immune system, sorry, the innate immune system. And so they're important for making sure that you have a big enough response to deal with whatever the infection is. And so if you are in a virus infecting those helper T cells, making them not work, what happens is now you're leaving your body open to other types of infections. And so what HIV can do is HIV can cause AIDS. And what AIDS stands for is Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, which just means that because your helper T cells have been infected with this virus, they're unable to help protect you from other types of infections, things like pneumonia or TB or even fungal infections. Those are the things that can cause the complications, which can lead to some very serious problems. Okay, so the difference between AIDS and HIV is that HIV is the virus itself, and AIDS is kind of like the syndrome that affects the whole body because of the virus that makes it so that they're unable to fight off other types of infections. Okay. So let's talk about how you can get the HIV. So HIV is going to be transmitted through any kind of bodily, not any kind, through some of bodily fluids, such as it can be anything blood related, right? So blood related, as well as the fluids through sex that can transmit HIV. HIV can also go through the placenta, so it can be transmitted directly from the mother to the fetus. And again, any contaminated blood that's going to go through. Things that it cannot go through is saliva and sweat. You can't get HIV through sweat or saliva, so things like touching, unless there's a blood, open cut, or kissing, no saliva, urine, it doesn't go through urine. So those aren't going to allow the transmission of the virus. And you can't get it through insect bites either. And I've had students in the past ask, well, why not? Because they're going into your body. And it has to do with the fact that the mosquitoes and the insects are not vectors, which means that they can't get the virus themselves. And if they can't get the virus themselves, then they won't then transmit it to you as well. Okay, so wear those condoms. Okay, let's talk about how we activate the T cells. Remember I said we were going to talk about that at the end. So the way that you activate the T cells is you need the innate immune system to get involved, and the innate immune system has what we call antigen presenting cells. Antigen presenting cells include macrophages, which, remember, those are the monocytes that have gone into the tissues, as well as another type of cell which are called dendritic cells. And so what happens is if they come in contact with an antigen in the body, like just while they're patrolling around, they'll take it, they're phagocytes, so they'll take it inside of their bodies, of their cells, not bodies, of their cells, they'll digest it, and what they'll do is they'll take a little piece of that the bacteria or whatever it is, the pathogen, and display it on the surface of the cell. They will then travel to the secondary lymphoid organs. So for example, like a lymph node where the T cells hang out. They'll travel to there, and then what they'll do is they'll show their little piece of the antigen to the T cells, and then the T cells will then become activated and differentiate into those 3 different types. And the reason this has to happen is because the T cells themselves are unable to bind to antigens just sort of free floating. They need the antigen like receptor complex that are created by these antigen presenting cells in order for it to bind and then activate the T cells. Okay, so once the T cells have been activated by the antigen presenting cells, they then create the regulatory, the helper, and the cytotoxic or killer T cells, and then they'll do the cell-mediated destruction of the infection. Okie dokie. Okay, so what do those dendritic cells do? Dendritic cells are a type of antigen-presenting cells. So you could say that they activate the T cells by presenting the antigens to the T cells. And they also are very important because they help link the innate immune system to the adaptive immune system. Okay, so if the innate immune system requires some more help, it'll then go activate the T cells will then activate B cells and activate other innate immune cells. So just sort of makes response bigger. Okay, so notice that I included, there's 2 bridges. We have the complement proteins, and the complement proteins are activated by the antibodies. And so the antibodies will activate the complement proteins, which will then activate and help with the innate immune system. Then we have the antigen presenting cells, which are part of the innate immune system, then activating the T cells. So it kind of goes both ways, right? So you've got a bridge from the innate to the adaptive and the adaptive to the innate. Nice body-wide system. Okay, that's the last of it. See you later.